Applying the Redundancy Principle by Marie Pellegrini. What is the redundancy principle? According to Clark and Mayer, the definition of the redundancy principle explains how people learn. They learn more deeply from a multimedia lesson when graphics are explained by audio narration alone rather than audio narration and on-screen text. This principle applies most when the lesson is fast-paced, the words are familiar to the learners, and many words are presented on the screen. Some exceptions to the redundancy principle include screens with no visuals, learners who are not native speakers of the course language, and placement of only a few key words on the screen. What the principle is not. The redundancy principle does not mean to repeat things over and over until a student learns a concept. Clark and Mayer say that there is a common belief that some people have visual learning styles while others have auditory learning styles. It seems that words should always be presented in both spoken and printed form so learners can choose the presentation format that best matches their learning preference. Understanding the redundancy principle is helpful when preparing lessons for your students. Understanding that what you might think looks fun and interesting for a learner may be hindering their ability to process, understand, and actually learn. In other words, the more information in a variety of formats like text, audio, video, and animation the learner has to process simultaneously, the more difficult it is to process and acquire the information. Much like this slide, it is information overload. Overloading cognitive resources could therefore lead to inefficient processing and reducing how one acquires knowledge. According to Clark and Mayer, memory and cognitive resource overloading could easily occur if, for example, a learner is trying to read text while listening to the same text narrated and viewing an animated sequence related to the content. There is too much going on for anyone to process the information as illustrated on this slide. Clark and Mayer provide two examples for including redundant on-screen text. The first is when students who viewed a technical video with a few printed words next to an illustration and narration demonstrated that the group who viewed text and illustrations outperformed the non-redundant group. Clark and Mayer called for revising the redundancy principle to allow for short amounts of printed text to be placed next to the corresponding part of the graphic. A second example shows that when more printed words are added and the lesson is slow-paced, students who are non-native speakers of the language can learn more deeply when they have short, printed caption and full narration. Clark and Mayer say that subtitles can be helpful and also if the students can control the pace of the video. Applying the redundancy principle. An example of how I try to be mindful of the redundancy principle in my social studies classroom is by carefully choosing the videos I used. This video, found on YouTube, helps my students understand the difficult and often abstract topic of longitude and latitude in the social studies lesson. The students view this video, we sing the song, and stop it periodically to show them the images and have a class discussion, finding locations and looking at measurements. We show the students body movements to go with the song to make the lesson more engaging. Students have a strong visual and an audio of the line locations on the globe. I've witnessed in my class that students definitely learn and retain the two terms after watching the video, which has very little text but has narration and images. What to look for in e-learning? According to Clark and Mayer, there are several suggestions in using media elements to improve learning. Number one, graphics are described by words presented in the form of audio narration, not by concurrent narration and redundant text. Number two, on-screen text can be narrated when the screens do not include graphics. Number three, when words are unfamiliar, they are presented as text. And number four, Short on-screen text labels or summaries are expanded with audio narration as shown in the longitude and latitude video in the previous slide. So in summary, Clark and Mayer say, based on research and theory presented, when the instructional message includes graphics, explain the graphics with narration alone. Do not add redundant on-screen text. There are important boundary conditions. Consider the use of redundant on-screen text when there is limited or no graphic information on the screen. The lesson is slow-paced or learner-paced. There are hard-to-hear technical or unfamiliar words, or there are only a few unobtrusive printed words. Thank you for listening to my explanation of the redundancy principle from Clark and Mayer.